morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great post-Super Bowl show for you today. Congratulations, of course, to any Kansas City fans out there. We will be discussing the game a little bit later. Did you watch any of it?
I did. I watched all of it.
Me too.
It was interesting. We'll get into this a little bit later, but there were a lot of events happening last night. The timeline was very mixed in terms of content from the game and content from world events, which we'll be covering later. But it was, satisfying to see on some level the outcome that a lot of the country was rooting for reasons outside of football kind of come to fruition. It started a little slow, but it ended up being a good game, a kind of a historical overtime match. But first, let's get into some meat and potatoes of the real news cycle. Now, concerns about President Biden's age continue to dominate headlines as voters are increasingly unsure he's got the mental acuity to do the job. The Hill reported on a new poll showing more than 85% of Americans think Biden is too old, following a bruising report by special counsel Bob Hur. In his report, Hur exonerated Biden of any wrongdoing when it came to mishandling classified documents, but alleged that Biden was an elderly man with a poor memory and thus was unable to recall a number of facts from his past, including those surrounding his son's death. The White House responded to Hur's report with a media blitz designed to allay fears surrounding Biden's age, alongside attacks on Hur himself. Axios reports that Biden officials, led by Vice President Kamala Harris, questioned Hur's motives, echoing Biden's anger that Hur's zinger about Biden's memory overshadowed Hur's decision not to charge the president over his handling of classified documents. Some Democrats took the report from Hur as a wake-up call that voters are deeply concerned with Biden's age. Failed 2016 presidential nominee Hillary Clinton even conducted an interview with MSNBC where she called the president's age a, quote, legitimate issue.
Meanwhile, many conservatives began to question the seeming hypocrisy on the part of the mainstream media surrounding how the story of Biden's mental health travails and Trump's alleged issues. Trump's son, Don Jr., responded to a headline from the New York Times urging caution in diagnosing memory loss. Don Jr. wrote, quote, lol, now the New York Times wants you to be very careful about diagnosing mental decline. Never stopped him before. What changed? The diagnosis at this point is irrelevant because it doesn't take a doctor to understand Joe Biden's sharp decline. We see it before our eyes every day. And frankly, that would be my answer to Democratic frustration over what Hur said in his statement. Look, we're seeing press conferences, interviews with Joe Biden every day where he says the wrong name. He names people who have been dead for decades. When he lost his train of thought during that answer about Hamas and a potential ceasefire agreement, he told the media actually had to help him out there. Reporters had to remind him what he was talking about. Right. We're seeing more of that day to day. So it's not really, they're acting like Hur was injecting this idea into the mainstream discourse, but talk to anyone out there in the real world, and they have grave concerns about Biden's age.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think that there is an argument, and Democrats maybe have a right to be frustrated about the extent to which Hur, in this report, seemed to go out of his way to say that Biden was mentally failing in these very specific ways. That being said, I do agree with you that we didn't need this report for confirmation. I will say that this seems to have unlocked something within Democratic pundits and politicians alike who seem to have been suppressing their desire to talk about the obvious ever since 2020, to be frank. And now, after the news cycle of Friday, which was really disastrous from Biden, it seems like the dogs have been unleashed. So just to really recap, what happened was after this report, there was, of course, a media cycle about how, oh my gosh, the whole reason that Biden is not really being held accountable for this document mishandling is because he's perceived to be just genuinely forgetful and not have the mental competency. He followed up with a press conference that was supposed to allay people's fears, that was supposed to say, hey, look, guys, I'm good, I'm competent, I can do this job. And in that press conference, he mixed up the president of Egypt and the president of Mexico. So in the press conference that he was supposed to be righting the ship, he doubled down on the exact kind of gaffe that he's been getting in trouble for weeks, back-to-back weeks and news cycles now. And so I think that now we have pundits, talking heads all over the liberal channels talking about, Is it going to be Kamala Harris? Are they going to replace him at the convention? Even Hillary Clinton talking about how this is a legitimate concern for the voting public, and that raising speculation about whether Hillary Clinton is going to throw her hat in the ring again.
I looked at the polling again. 2/3 of Americans think Biden's age is a significant issue, including a majority of Democrats. It's like a slim majority. It's like 55%. So, of course, it's an issue. I mean, she has to say it. She has to acknowledge that it's an issue. The question becomes, are they going to do anything about it? And I, frankly, don't think they will, because they is Joe Biden on some level. I've said this before. There's not really anyone who can force him from the throne unless he agrees to go, and I've seen no indication. I mean, honestly, if we knew it was going to start getting this bad so quickly, he should have declined. He should have said, I'm not going to seek another term, and he can throw his weight behind Kamala Harris if he wants, or they can have an actual contest to determine whether it be her or someone else. Yeah. But I think it's too late for that, and I don't think he has any indication that he wants to do that.
Yeah, CNN did a story a couple of days ago analyzing the number of interviews done by recent presidents as a kind of indicator of how willing they've been to come before the public and how maybe concerned they are or are not about their ability to come off well in front of the public. So Obama, by this point in his presidency, had done 422 interviews. Trump, by this point in his presidency, had done 300 interviews. Biden, at this point in his presidency, has done 83 interviews. Yeah. Orders of magnitude less than these other two most.
If I was his handlers, I'd be afraid to put him in front of a camera as well, because he can't get through basic, easy interviews. He, in that press conference you're referring to on Friday, he had, I think it was a response to Ducey. Mm-hmm. I think it was Ducey. It might have been another reporter, where he got combative, and it was supposed to be like slamming the door shut on this question of my age, and he jumbled that. It didn't make sense what he was saying. Mm-hmm. It was so bad. Yeah, the cat's really out of the bag on this one.
And people who I think have been defending Biden through hell and high water. People like Bill Maher, who have been really consistent on Trump as a threat to democracy, and therefore we cannot abide any criticism of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. In a recent segment, he was basically flipping the argument and basically sounding a lot like what Dean Phillips has been saying for a long time now, which is that if it is true that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, and Democrats think that if Donald Trump is going to be reelected, democracy in America as we know it is going to come to an end, then what is the wisdom of electing a candidate with historically high unfavorables, who is in observable cognitive and physical decline, and not allowing there to be simply a process by which we could vet the American public, vet other candidates to see if the American public has an appetite for anybody in the alternative. Really putting us in a position where it is frankly likely that Donald Trump will win.
Nate Silver made that exact point on Twitter. He said, you don't demonstrate your seriousness that Trump is an existential threat to democracy by going through the motions to renominate an 81-year-old with a 38% approval rating, who 75% of voters think is too old, without giving anyone a choice, because that's just how things are done.
Yeah, it's incredible. I will note also that we certainly have been ringing this alarm bell for a very long time on this show. We have consistently advocated for a primary process and have been unflinching and talking about these legitimate concerns about the president's kind of cognitive capacity long before it became socially acceptable to do so. And I can only think about what better position the Democrats would be in, although I don't really care about that, but better position democracy would be in if more journalists had not chosen it until the house was falling down around them before they were willing to state the obvious and report on the obvious.
I think you're very right. More Rising right after this.